We're beginning chapter 20 of Surprise Kill Vanish by Annie Jacobson. Carlos the Jackal. It was Christmas time when Billy Waugh was summoned to his CIA reporting site in Northern Virginia. He was being sent on a top-secret, Gamma-classified mission as the senior operator on a 4-person reconnaissance and surveillance team. During the classified briefing, Waugh learned that the target was Elick Ramirez Sanchez, nom de guerre Carlos the Jackal, the mastermind behind the spectacular 1975 OPEC siege. Unseen for years and believed by many to be dead, he was now hiding out in Khartoum. CIA Chief of Station Cofer Black was determined to get him. The CIA didn't want to kill Carlos the Jackal. They wanted to capture him. For 18 years he'd been hiding, able to function out of reach of Interpol. The CIA, the FBI, the Mossad and France's General Directorate for External Security, DGSE, each had placed a significant bounty on information leading to his arrest. The Jackal moved around the globe as the guest of one of state sponsor of terror, official and unofficial, after the next: Libya, Syria, Cuba, Iraq, Hungary, Romania. For the CIA, learning what his quid pro quo was with these countries would help the Counter-Terrorist Center better understand how the global terrorist network worked. How assassins operated, and who pulled the strings. Carlos the Jackal was a dangerous killer who machine-gunned down people who were after him. Cofer Black explained in 2017, Billy Waugh was the perfect person to conduct a hidden-hand operation to capture him. On December 13, 1993, Waugh flew from Dulles Airport to Frankfurt to Khartoum. His diplomatic passport said he worked for the U.S. Department of State. Looking down over Khartoum, as he flew in, he observed the White River and the Blue Nile, the dirt streets, the ramshackle houses made of mud and tin, all barely visible through a thick brown haze that hung like fog. Being in Sudan was like being behind enemy lines, Waugh recalls. It's a non-permissive environment. Every step must be taken with great care. At the airport, he showed his credentials. A Dinka woman examined his passport and marked his travel bag with white chalk, indicating he was a diplomat and could not be searched. Inside the bags were chemicals necessary to develop film. By the time Waugh got to his embassy-owned villa, it was past curfew. He'd been stopped by soldiers, called Jundis, on the way in and had given them a carton of cigarettes as a bribe. The U.S. sanctions against Sudan had made money even tighter, and everyone was looking for a bribe. But at the safe house, Waugh's teammates were waiting up for him. They all had last name aliases and would use their regular first names: Billy, Greg, Don, Santos. The team talked for hours. The first thing in the morning, Waugh acclimated himself to the city by heading out for a jog, the quickest way to re-establish area familiarization. Back to the villa, the team climbed into their Land Cruiser and headed to the U.S. Embassy complex on Abdel Latif Avenue. The pace of the Sudanese intelligence services had picked up since the bin Laden job, Wah noted. The vehicle they were driving in was almost immediately tailed. A white Toyota pickup truck filled with soldiers carrying AK-47s followed along a few cars back in a signature show of force. The Land Cruiser crossed the railroad bridge and headed into Khartoum City and over to the U.S. Embassy compound. In the parking lot there, the guards, Dinka tribesmen, and Marine Corps commander kept diligent watch. The team passed through heavy security and traveled up to the third floor, where the CIA station was then located, next to the Regional Security Office, the State Department's law enforcement agency responsible for all in-country personnel. They made their way through an entry lock, past the passcode panel, and through several more doors before they were finally inside. Cover Black led the meeting. Everybody wanted Carlos the Jackal, he said. Mossad wanted him. France wanted him. The FBI wanted him. The CIA was going to get him. But the first part of the equation had been the most difficult to date. Identifying who Carlos the Jackal actually was. No one could say for sure, since there had not been a photograph taken of Ilich Ramirez Sanchez in roughly 8 years. In 1985, the Hungarian security services had secretly made a video of him meeting with their chief of security. Looking fat, slovenly, and unshaven, Carlos the Jackal pleaded that he not be forced to leave Hungary. The image was all the team had to go on for now. The Jackal was a heavy drinker and smoker, a partier in declining health. But how to find a single debauched-looking white man who happened to be a most wanted person in a chaotic, lawless city of over 1 million people? This was the first critical part of the job. Photograph the Jackal to establish proof of life. It was the Jordanian General Intelligence Directorate, GID, Jordanian's equivalent of the CIA, that had provided the initial intelligence that indicated the Jackal had moved to Khartoum. Under the pretense of being a Muslim, Ilich Ramirez Sanchez had married a second time, a 26-year-old Jordanian named Lana Abdel Selam Jarar. General Intelligence Directorate tracked the two of them to Khartoum. Jordanian intelligence provided the CIA with a photograph of Jarar. In Khartoum, the Jackal started making mistakes. It was his lack of discipline that would lead to his downfall, recalls Wah. His first mistake was getting drunk and starting a fight. He got into an argument with a shopkeeper and pulled a gun on the man, which landed him in jail. Local police do not take kindly to foreigners. He had to call Turabi, President al-Bashar's Secretary General, to come get him out. That was only the first mistake, says Wah. He decided it was time to get himself a foreign bodyguard. That was a fatal move. Carlos the Jackal made an international call to one of his old associates from the days of the Black September terrorist attacks. The Israeli Intelligence Corps picked up the signal's intelligence. The man, believed to be an Iraqi national, went by the alias Tarek. Mossad provided the CIA with this first real break in the case. They had photographs of Tarek, which were sent to the CIA's Khartoum station via secure fax. We all studied the photographs carefully, remembers Hua. What was unusual about Tarek was that he looked Caucasian, with white wavy hair. He was around 40 years old and fit. He had big muscles, like a bodybuilder on steroids. Hua was assigned the job of photographing Tarek when he arrived at Khartoum International Airport. But Carlos the Jackal had friends in high places. A state-sponsored handler met Tarek before he entered the public area and covertly escorted him away through an airport side door. On January 20th, 1994, Hua and Greg went to the Meridian Hotel on a reconnaissance mission. Carlos the Jackal frequented international hotels, alcohol was served, and it made sense he'd send his new bodyguard to case these places in advance. Disguised as businessmen eating dinner, Hua and Greg spotted Tarek sitting on a couch in the lobby, doing a crossword puzzle. Hotel clerks were known to be on payroll of the secret police, the political security organization. Hanging out doing surveillance was not an option. So Hua and Greg finished their dinner, went outside, and sat in their parked vehicle. With a solid view of the front exit, they waited. After some time, Tarek sauntered out. He walked up to a white 1990 Toyota Cressida, license plate 1049, and climbed inside. This was a tremendous lead. Now it was time to follow him. Tarek pulled out of the lot and drove toward the Blue Nile River. He made an immediate U-turn, tradecraft for how to lose a tail. Hua and Greg followed him for a few blocks, but after a few more U-turns, it was time to drop the surveillance. Back at the CIA station, Hua and Greg shared their findings with Cover Black. The search was narrowing in focus, which meant it was gaining momentum, says Hua. Over the next few weeks, the team divided up, each man spending 16 hours a day searching for the white Cressida, license plate 1040. Each member of the team had a portable radio that was linked back to a comm system at the CIA station. This enabled them to track one another's whereabouts at all times and communicate with the Khartoum station in real time. Transmissions were encrypted. Anyone trying to listen in to what we were doing would hear nothing but loud noise, like howling wind, recalls Hua. Each man had a specific talent, just as in Special Forces operations. Team member Don, a former police officer, was a rare genius in vehicle searches, says Hua. He had a remarkable ability to recognize vehicles and identify plates from great distances, almost like a sixth sense. With a list of the places Carlos the Jackal was most likely to visit, they waited and watched. The Meridian Hotel, the Hilton Hotel, the Diplomatic Club were the three top spots. Every Thursday night, the Diplomatic Club threw a huge party, complete with disco dancing and a full bar. It was located 15 miles outside the city center. On the first Thursday in February, the Cressida was spotted in the parking lot. Hua picked up the car as it left the disco and headed north. Traffic was crazy out here in the suburbs, with cars, trucks, and donkey carts all fighting for a space on the dirt road. There were no lights and lots of tall people meandering across the road. He lost the car in no time and headed back to the Khartoum station. The excitement of locating the Chrysidia wore off, followed by a long period of surveillance. They were back to ground zero, the hunt for the vehicle. After days of searching, excitement gave way to monotony. They searched the city in vain, 18 hours a day. Most of the apartment complexes in Khartoum were surrounded by 10-foot mud walls. Trying to find Tarek felt like searching for a needle in a haystack. When he wasn't out conducting surveillance, Wah practiced his photo developing skills in the CIA photographic laboratory located in the U.S. Embassy compound on the 6th floor. Developing film in Khartoum was challenging. The water came out of the pipes somewhere around 90 degrees Fahrenheit. To get a proper water bath cooled down to between that requisite 68 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit involved the skillful use of ice cubes. Wah and Greg were inside the film lab when the encrypted radio sprang to life. Don had spotted the Chrysidia in Khartoum's New Addition neighborhood. It had just pulled up to Ibn Khaldun Hospital, on 19th Street. Wah told Don to take up a surveillance position. If the car moved, he said he'd follow it. Wah and Greg hurried out of the lab, down the embassy's private elevator, and out of the parking lot. The 2 PSO intelligence officers assigned to tail them had fallen asleep in their pickup truck. Wah and Greg climbed into their Land Cruiser and began driving fast, headed toward the hospital. Wah told Greg to open the lockbox that was welded to the floor, take out the camera, a 35mm Canon F80 with a 300mm lens, and assemble it. 5 minutes later, they were at the hospital. Wah spotted Don's car, drove past it, and pulled his vehicle into a spot 20 meters away from the Chrysidia. From his back window, he now had a clear shot of Tarek's car. Less than 10 minutes before, we'd been in a lab at the embassy, mixing chemicals. 2 white men sitting in a car would surely get the attention of the ever-present PSO. Wah told Greg the plan. On the dirt shoulder of the road, there was a vendor selling wares. Greg should go over there and consider buying something. Hang out. Wait until Carlos the Jackal exited the hospital, then make some commotion to get the attention. Wah got out of the Land Cruiser and opened the hood. Feigning engine trouble, he fiddled around inside. Then, leaving the hood open, he climbed back inside and set up the camera, using the space between the front seat and the headrest as a platform for a long lens. He focused the lens on the hospital exit doors. As I was adjusting the lens, the face of a pretty woman came into focus, he recalls. It was Lana, Carlos's second wife. He quickly snapped 4 or 5 pictures he believed were properly focused and framed. As Lana Jarrar walked toward the Chrysidia, there was a sudden outburst near where the vendor was selling his wares, on the dirt shoulder of the road. "You've cheated me," Greg shouted at the vendor, agitated like he was willing to fight. Wah watched as the man stood up. He was about 7 feet tall, recalls Wah. He towered over Greg. Greg continued to play the role of the customer who'd been cheated. Wah kept his lens trained on the hospital door. A man emerged, Caucasian, in his 40s, well-groomed, with reddish hair, combed back, a mustache, fat, 40 or 50 pounds overweight, recalls Wah. He carried small weapons bag. He carried a small weapons bag over one shoulder. I spotted a leg holster near his right ankle. He wore a shooter's vest, sleeveless and with pockets in the front. Behind him, a black African man was carrying a large manila envelope in one hand, following the Jackal to his car. Greg continued arguing with the tall Dinka vendor. The situation had escalated to such a degree, recalls Wah, that it had the attention of the fat man who'd emerged from the hospital. Click, click, click. Wah took photographs of Carlos the Jackal, one photograph after the next, until he'd used the entire roll of film. Lana Gerard climbed into the driver's seat and started the car. Carlos climbed into the passenger seat as the hospital technician set the large manila envelope inside the car on the back seat. X-rays, thought Wah. There was a quick exchange between Wah and Greg. Time to close down the operation, Wah said. Greg pulled a large bill from his wallet and paid the unwitting Dinka vendor for his troubles. It was time to get out of there, fast. The Cressidia pulled out of its parking spot. Ahead, Wah watched Don pull out of his spot and followed along. Wah and Greg headed back to the embassy. We tried getting Cofer Black on the encrypted radio, but he was nowhere to be found. At the embassy, they rushed into the photo lab. It was the most important roll of film I'd handled to date, recalls Wah. Under the glow of the red light bulb, Wah worked patiently to get the water bath to the precise temperature. A few degrees off and he could ruin the film. It was quiet in the lab. The smell of the German photographic chemicals filled his senses. When he was confident the elements were correct, he developed the film. Was this Carlos the Jackal? The pictures were sharp, clear. The target jumps out at you, remembers Wah, and for a minute, it's like you've already captured him. Right after the film was developed, Don called. He tailed the Cressidia to an apartment complex in a residential area, where the car was now parked behind a gate. He'd observed the man and the woman walked up a flight of stairs and head inside. It was very likely that this was where Carlos the Jackal lived. Wah continued developing the film. Wah and Greg couldn't wait to tell Cofer Black. More than 2 hours had passed and they still hadn't heard from him. Screw it, thought Wah. I decided to break protocol and drive to Cofer's house myself. Wah and Greg drove out of the embassy, down along the Blue Nile River, past the Chinese embassy, past Turabi's home, past where the aspiring terrorist Osama bin Laden lived. They drove over to the eastern side of Al-Riyad's neighborhood where Cofer Black resided. We said hello to the guard who rang the bell. Cofer Black emerged in running attire. I'd been exercising in my home, Black recalls. I asked them what in the hell they wanted. What was so important it couldn't wait? Billy Wah handed Cofer Black an envelope containing the photographs. Jesus Christ, Billy, Black recalls telling Wah. This is Carlos's goddamn wife. Keep looking, Billy said. They moved inside the house, where Black spread the photographs out across his dining room table. Who the hell took these? He asked. Greg said, Wah did. 2 hours before, outside Ibn Khaldun Hospital. Time to get the photos to CIA headquarters in D.C., Cover Black said. At 2 a.m., a lieutenant colonel with the U.S. Department of State diplomatic staff boarded a Lufthansa flight to Frankfurt, continuing on to Dulles Airport in Virginia. 2 CIA officers met the lieutenant colonel at the plane. Cover sometimes said I took actions without bothering to think of the possible repercussions, which was sometimes true, Waugh recalled in 2017. That's what it means to be an independent contractor, a singleton. You can do the job, get it done, without having the CIA mirror your every move. It involves risk. You can't make a mistake or your bacon gets kicked out. When it pays off big time. The photograph went to the 7th floor at the CIA headquarters at Langley. There, 2 division chiefs gave their opinions. An agency operative flew the pictures back the other way to Amman, where Jordanian intelligence confirmed that this was Elik Ramirez Sanchez. The CIA wanted to capture him. The paramilitary operation needed to move fast, but not too fast. There were spies everywhere. If the Jackal got wind of the fact that the agency had located him and would now create a plan to capture him, he'd get out of Khartoum fast. Shortly after the Jordanians confirmed the Jackal's identity, a local asset told his handler that Carlos was moving to Cyprus, transiting through Cairo. Waugh and a team were sent to the Africa terminal of Cairo International Airport to conduct surveillance. For 6 days, they watched the terminal. Carlos never showed up. Covert action is not all action. Sometimes you sit around bored out of your mind. A lot of your time is spent running down a bad tip, says Waugh. In March, Cofer Black authorized a team to watch the house that Don had identified. They located a dilapidated 6-story apartment building across the street. The apartment on the top floor had a direct line of sight to Carlos's building. It was perfect. It was a hellhole, recalls Waugh. Filthy beyond what you can imagine. Ceilings crumbling down. Holes in the wall. No running water. No toilet. But it had a direct view of the entrance and exit, and the Toyota Cressida parked right out front. Waugh and Santos told the building manager that they were surveyors working for the U.S. government. Sensing money, he asked for $700 a month, recalls Waugh, an exorbitant amount in Sudan, where the average income was about $300 a year. He also asked for 3 months up front. In a place like Sudan, you can't hide the fact that you're American. Some of the money is keep your mouth shut money. He didn't report us to the PSO because he wanted the 4th month's rent. The next challenge was getting the surveillance equipment into the apartment. To avoid drawing attention to themselves, Waugh and Santos worked at night. The camera equipment included several camera bodies and an assortment of lenses and tripods that together weighed several hundred pounds. The lens that was hardest to conceal was a 4,000 millimeter Questar, 24 inches in diameter and 140 pounds. It was secreted into Khartoum via diplomatic pouch, in a case the size of a footlocker. Little footnote, there is no regulation to how big this diplomatic pouch is. It could be a semi-truck or a tanker ship, what have you. A pouch. Moving on. Inside the observation post, they had 2 folding cots, blackout curtains, and a Bunsen burner for boiling water and cooking rice. Creating a fast way out of the observation post in an event of raid by the security police was key to success as well as peace of mind. If we were caught in the observation post, we were told we would almost certainly be shot on sight, says Wah. So we devised an escape route using rappelling ropes. We located the sturdiest pipes, then rigged up a system with ropes. We left a pair of rappelling gloves in an air vent on the roof. With an observation post set up, they began surveillance. For this, Wah fashioned a large chart on the wall, onto which he would document who came and who went and when. Wah was intrigued by how reckless, pathetic, and debauched Carlos was, and yet how predictable was his routine. He was a drunken partier. He went out, drank, came home, slept, went out again. His security detail were all Arabs. Their style appeared to be modeled after the U.S. Secret Service, says Wah. They kept perimeter guard around the house. Before a visitor arrived, they'd open the gate, look around for an ambush, and then go back to get Carlos or Lana, then get them back into the car. It was the same every day, says Wah, but one thing they forgot to do was ever look up. They never saw our observation post. That was their big mistake. Plans for a capture mission were being drawn up. One day at the embassy, Kofor Black told Billy Wah that he wanted a shot of the Jackal that was really, really close. Billy used the Questar lens and took a photograph of Carlos's teeth. What happened? He happened to have a toothpick in his mouth, recalls Wah. What the hell is this? Kofor Black asked when Wah showed him a photograph that, at first glance, looked more like postmodern art than a surveillance photograph. It's a toothpick balanced between Carlos the Jackal's teeth, said Wah. Black chuckled and got back to work. Wah photographed everyone who visited the Jackal's apartment. It was a parade of bad guys, Wah says. For the counter-terrorist center at Langley, this was an intelligence goldmine. One week, the CIA chief of station in Paris, Richard Holm, visited. Dick Holm was a legend at the CIA. He'd served as a covert action operator in Laos, as had Wah, although the two men had not worked together. Later, stationed in Congo, Holm had been surveilling military targets from a 2-seater T-28 when his plane crashed into rebel territory. He survived, but suffered third-degree burns over 35% of his body. He lived only because he was rescued and taken care of by local Azande tribesmen who dug bugs out of his wounds using a knife and covered him in a homeopathic blue-black paste made of snake oil and tree bark to keep his burns from becoming infected. Another CIA pilot also on the mission that day, a man named Tunan, was captured by a different group of tribesmen, the Simbas, who killed and ate him, according to reports by local missionaries. The Simbas believed that if you eat the flesh and vital organs of your enemy, you gain strength. Holm explained in an oral history, the world of covert action was perilous. It made no sense who lived and who died. Dick Holm, who had been tracking Carlos the Jackal since the early 1980s, he would now act as the liaison between DGSE and the CIA. The man in the lead on the French side was Philippe Rondat, a special services investigator who'd been tracking the Jackal even longer, back to when the terrorist had killed 2 French intelligence officers before the OPEC siege. Waugh briefed both men on what he'd seen from the observation post. The 2 senior officers chose not to share with Waugh details about the snatch and grab capture mission they were planning. On August 12th, 1994, Waugh watched Carlos the Jackal and Lana Jadar leave the house at the usual time. He photographed them exiting as he always did. Then something unusual happened. They didn't return after the disco closed, as was customary. All night, Waugh waited and watched. Then into the following day, he was surprised. Had Carlos the Jackal gotten away? I got a call from Kofor Black over the encrypted commo. Come on in, Billy, was all he said. Anxious to learn what was happening, Waugh drove fast over to the U.S. Embassy. Pulling into the driveway, he was surprised to see the U.S. Ambassador Donald Peterson standing out front. Waugh parked his vehicle and climbed out. Peterson walked toward him, his hand extended. The ambassador said, "Great work, Billy." And as he shook his hand, he said, "Carlos the Jackal has been captured." Inside the CIA station, the staff celebrated with champagne. It was a big day. In the snack bar, on the overhead television set, Waugh watched the Air France network present a news broadcast. The French had captured Carlos the Jackal in Khartoum. An announcer said the terrorist was on his way to Paris when he would face justice for a myriad of attacks and crimes. The role of the CIA in this mission remained entirely hidden. For several days, news crews gathered around the apartment complex formerly inhabited by Ilik Ramirez Sanchez. By the 3rd day, they were gone at 3 a.m. Waugh went out for a last jog. He passed by old observation post one last time. Running down Riyadh Road toward Airport Road, he spotted traffic in front of Carlos the Jackal's apartment building. What the hell is going on, he wondered. It was the middle of the night, hours before dawn. There was a number of vehicles, a few station wagons, and a large truck with an engine running. There were 20 or so policemen. They'd created a perimeter around the building. Waugh recognized a man from photographs he'd viewed during agency intelligence briefings. He was large and had very black skin, recalls Waugh. He wore a crisp white turban and a crisp, clean white robe. There was a large security presence around the man. I realized it was Sudan's number 2, Hassan al-Turabi, in the flesh. Waugh stopped jogging and took cover. He called Santos on the portable radio he kept tied to his body at all times in case of emergency. I woke him up. I told him to get up and look out of the window of the observation post. Santos did as instructed. Use the night lens and get some photographs, Waugh said. Use high-speed night film. If Santos could get photographs of Turabi, The CIA would have evidence linking Carlos the Jackal to his state sponsor, Sudan, from where Wah hid in the bushes. He watched Alana Jarar exit the building. She was carrying a suitcase and crying, he recalls. Hassan al-Turabi comforted her like they were old friends. Lana climbed into the back seat of a police vehicle and was driven away. In the morning, Wah called Kofor Black to tell him about the new photos. What in the hell were you doing outside at 3 a.m., Kofor asked. Staying fit, boss, Wah said. At the embassy, Wah learned what had happened to the Jackal after he was captured. They jabbed him with sodium pentothal, says Wah. They put a bag over his head and said, start answering questions, or he'd be turned over to Mossad. No one wants to be turned over to Mossad. Carlos the Jackal sang like a bird. According to Billy Wah, the CIA got the intelligence it hoped for and more. The CIA files on Ilich Ramirez Sanchez remain classified. He was taken to France, where he was tried, convicted, and sentenced by an anti-terrorism court to serve multiple life sentences in a French prison. There he remains. And that is it for chapter 20. Yes. Until next time.